Vlad, welcome to Startup Grind. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Derek. It's amazing to be here. Hey, everyone.
So, I wanted to just start. Webflow's raised $215 million, which for most people, and even maybe to some degree yourself, is sort of like, it's probably it's just strange to even say.
Actually, I don't think I've ever internalized that number. I thought it was somewhere in the 100 to 200 range, but I never thought it was over 200. So I haven't done the math yet.
Check the account, make sure it's still there. So I feel like you, just knowing your history, I feel like you more than most founders can really relate to the sort of the struggle and the difficulty of getting something going, getting this creation off the operating table and getting it a pulse. What sort of early things did you and the team relentlessly focus on just to get from sort of 0 to 1 state?
That's such a broad question, since Webflow, I think, has gone through 4 different iterations of trying to start up with different founders. 2 of those times were just myself being solo. I think the thing that has been the biggest factor in that is weaved in through all of those attempts and has kept me going is just the sense that something is broken in the world and it can be better. And I think there's nothing else, having gone through near bankruptcy, having kind of working on Webflow, and just not even nights and weekends. Like, it was, we had kids at the time. We were very young, so nights were taken up by kids and weekends were taken up by kids. So it was like, what is there outside of the day job and nights and weekends? Basically sleep time that went into some early iterations of Webflow, which I don't always recommend, right? Like, these days you start talking about that kind of schedule, and it just, especially if you're imposing it on your team, that's definitely not something that you want to promote from like a work-life balance perspective. But for me, the thing that has consistently been the biggest sort of drive is just knowing that this needs to exist. And knowing that it needs to exist just pushes you into trying all sorts of things to get it off the ground. Like, for us, it was like, how do we get one customer to use us? And it started off as, we wanted to be a product company from the very beginning, but, we didn't have a product. So you had to find like one client that you freelance with, and then try to solve that problem for them and like slowly iterate on the product so that the next client is using more of a product. And then, maybe you're like 95% doing custom freelance work, and then 5% is solved by the product. And maybe the next client is like 6% using the product, and then like 94%, custom development. But I think the very early, so I'll jump into like the final version of Webflow that actually worked with the current co-founders, the one that we started in 2012. And I think the biggest thing that we learned there is that we have to ship often. Like, the previous sort of, starting as a designer, I was in 3D animation and graphic design, and you always want to get things perfect. You see this like every icon, every screen just has to have like perfect harmony and like has to fit the brand or whatever. But then you spend months and months like polishing this stuff, and sometimes you have this vision of what the product will be that you're never quite happy with it. And I'm just glad that along the way we had advisors and people who just forced us and just said like, hey, if you don't ship, you're going to die. Even if you're not proud of this thing, even if you're like super embarrassed by it, even if you don't think anybody's going to pay for it, you got to ship and you got to iterate. And that, I think, was the biggest reason why I'm probably sitting here today, was because like we were forced by other people to get something out there, to show the world like some idea of what you're building, to build momentum for it.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that experience. I think lots of people here can relate to that. We have startups. We have, maybe about half the companies are or maybe about 20% are pre-customer launched, but just trying to get going. 50% are early traction. And then sort of 30-ish% are sort of growing, scaling beyond that. I guess in the beginning, right, you're just sort of naturally, or at least this was my experience, sounds like yours, like you're juggling lots of balls and you're trying to figure out like what things are gonna, like you said, like we want to be a product company, we're freelancing, like what things are gonna stick. How did you know when was the right moment to stop juggling some of those balls and start focusing on the one thing? Like how did you finally decide that or figure that out, that like, okay, it's time to just go like all in on this one thing?
This is a bit of survivorship bias and like what worked for me. So, you know, I don't know if it's like a learnable lesson for everyone, but this is a little bit of like Webflow lore. The second time we started Webflow, this is 2007-ish. I started with a couple of buddies from Intuit. We're all like brand new grads from school, starting as like, they had what was called the rotational development program at RDP, where you would start in like 6 months, spend in like different business units to sort of learn and see what you want to do. So there's like a bunch of us that just started Intuit, first job out of college. And, you know, the whole like startup Web 2.0 movement is happening. Like people are getting funded. So we're like, yeah, this is the dream. Like, sure, we'll work it into it on the side, but we'll start this company. So we like create the corporation and we file for a trademark. And then we find out that some company in Florida has the trademark for Webflow. And it costs us like thousands of dollars. And at the time, like lawyers were giving out sort of $10,000 to $15,000 like credits. So you would like start with them and then they would, you know, charge you
at like 3x their normal rate.
Exactly. But anyway, so we spent all of that money plus more trying to fight this trademark thing, and then just kind of gave up. Like it was you know, we almost called the company Marked Up, like MARKDUP, because you had to do stuff with missing vowels or whatever because domains weren't available. And it kind of like lost steam, and we went back to our jobs. But there was like this trademark application that was rejected. And then later, I kept working into it. I had 2 kids. We moved to Sacramento. We were about to put an offer in on a house. So basically like settled. And out of the blue, I have moved like 2 times. An envelope arrives, like a padded envelope that says like "don't bend" or whatever. I open it up and it says like trademark certificate for Webflow granted to Webflow LLC or whatever, which I had like way back then as an individual kind of proprietorship. And it was like, how is this not a sign that I need to start this full time? So that's when my wife and I started talking about, okay, what would it take to like move back to the Bay Area? And like, you know, try to apply to Y Combinator, do the whole startup thing. And we started planning like what amount of savings would we need to do this like full time for at least a few months. And that's when it was like, I knew at that point, remember how I said like, you know, 5% was built in Webflow and then 6% or whatever. I was still like the 7% range or something like that. Like I had no product built. And I knew that if I kept at that pace of just like freelancing on the side while working into it, it was going to take like 20 years to get to an actual product. So that's when it was just, you know, it was a pulled the ripcord, like it's now or never. And our kids were very young at the time, like 1 and 3. So it's a really big bet to take. But just that serendipitous moment of like, how can like something like this arrive 6 years later out of the blue? Like it's got to be a sign that this needs to go full time. And it was just like that small catalyst that gave me enough confidence, even though it wasn't, you know, it wasn't anything, it wasn't really traction. It wasn't really, you know, anything happening in the business. It wasn't quite like, I wasn't financially set. It was still, you know, kind of still going more or less paycheck to paycheck. It was just that confidence that, okay, something in the world wants me to make this. And go full time. And that's kind of how the ball started rolling.
You know, a lot of times too, it's with family and, you know, yourself, you're kind of like trying to mentally figure out how am I going to do this? Like have the courage for myself. And then, but the other side of it is your family too. Like your wife, you've got your kids. I mean, like same situation for me. I quit my job at EA when my son was 6 weeks old, and it was like, but it's like, like, how do you manage the sort of the risk and sort of bring those people along with you so that, because because your startup could end if your spouse or significant other like tells you like, I can't take this anymore. Like you can't, I mean, it's not just about you, it's about them and helping them get there too. Like how have you managed that with the people that you love and trust, and helping them, you know, sort of be able to get on board with you and stay on board with you when it didn't really make sense to, probably at times?
Right. The answer is like kind of threefold, because at first it was kind of easy, right? Like it was a lot of energy, a lot of, you know, my wife had known that I tried to start Webflow like 3 different times before that. So it was always like, we got married.
She'd heard about it once or twice.
Right, exactly. Like I already was working on Webflow when we got married. So it was kind of known as inevitability. But then when we had kids, it definitely like the risk profile or whatever, the amount of risk that she was willing to take and I was willing to take kind of went through the floor. And I think initially it was the combination of like, okay, the energy that has been there around the idea of Webflow for 10 plus years. 1, 2, knowing that we're planning for it, we're actually like saving money and we'll have, you know, 3 to 4 months of savings where I can operate with no income. And it's like, basically the idea is so good that it's guaranteed to get customers. That's I genuinely believe that. And we saved up like legitimately like 3 or 4 months of like personal expenses and about $10,000 of like to get the company off the ground, to incorporate and to make a Kickstarter video. So to me, it was like the combination of, we have enough money to get off the ground. We are going to make this Kickstarter video. We're going to make like hundreds of thousands of dollars in Kickstarter funds. And here's the plan. And she was fully on board at that point. Then that Kickstarter video turned out to be a total dud. Like we spent close to 10 grand doing it, made the whole recording, found out at the last minute that we didn't read the terms of service and they don't accept SaaS applications. So you can't even fund things that you can like sign up for or whatever. And you can't redo the video. We're like saying, hey, Kickstarter all over the place. So those 3 months of savings very quickly turned into 0 months of savings. And then, so this was in September, we incorporated in like end of October of 2012, the video didn't really work out. Then we applied to YC, got rejected in early November. Then my daughter got sick in October. Still fine now, but it was like a life-threatening situation where we had essentially what was called catastrophic health insurance. So to try to save money, you get health insurance that saves you from like, if you get cancer or need like really heavy surgery, but the trade-off is it's much cheaper per month, right? Then we find out that my daughter has to get all these tests around like Christmas time. All those tests cost like close to $10,000, which is our deductible. So we spend all this money and then it rolls over to January, and guess what? Deductible is
do it again.
Starts over. So we start selling cars, converting like a car to a lease. So because you get some cash or whatever your equity is to sort of like a cheap lease that you can pay monthly or whatever. At that point, my wife is, we're doing these credit card, what those balance transfers where you write yourself a check. And they charge you like 2-3% interest or whatever, and then you have to pay back later. So that's how we're funding family life at this point. And my brother and I, who's my co-founder, and my other co-founder, we're literally like spending like $9 a day on dinner because you can take one fajita plate at Una Mas and split it 3 ways because they give you like multiple fajitas. And working at this free called the Hacker Dojo in Mountain View.
I was there.
So at that point, it really turned into like we had to give ourselves a deadline. Like if we don't launch something by at the time we said March, then we have to go get our jobs back. Like that's what I was telling my wife. Like it's just unsustainable. Like there's only when you sign up for 3 months. of, the money's coming. And then it's 6-9 months later and there's like zero funding and you're going into severe debt. Like that's where I really want to stress like the survivorship bias. Part of like my advice here is that some founders might be going through this and pulling the same strategy, and like 95 times out of 100, it actually doesn't work out the way that it worked out for me, because we were able to get traction and the product worked, and we're just lucky to like when we launched the idea of the product got enough like users interested in it that showed that there could be traction. So it was really, really tough. And that was actually that like November to March timeframe. It was really precarious. Like I was already talking to Intuit to get my job back. My brother Sergi was planning to move back to San Diego to get his job back. We're going to start kind of moonlighting again on Webflow. So I don't know what advice I can give there.
That's a lot. No, that experience is incredibly helpful to hear. I mean, I think it's easy to look and see somebody like, and read some press release or some blog post or something, TechCrunch, like, oh my gosh, it's like, they don't know what I'm going through. But, you've clearly been through the sort of valley of the shadow of death. And I think every founder has this at some point. Like at some point, everybody stares death in the eyes, and like, and you have to do, I did the same thing. Like I was looking for part-time jobs, I was talking to friends about like what to do. And then by some miracle, like it was able to get enough money to go another 6 months. And then, and to hear that experience that you had and your family had, and just looking at some of the comments and things, it clearly is something that people are dealing with right now and can relate to. And I think this is something that's also unique to you, is this idea of like fundraising versus being profitable. Like you had to make money because you didn't have any money and you hadn't raised money, or hadn't raised a lot of money. And so could you just talk about how you have thought about, I think it's quite unique actually, to most startups that you sort of see coming out of Y Combinator or wherever, like the sort of Valley sort of startup. Like how have you looked at profitability versus fundraising for sort of growing the business over time?
So we kind of, I'll tell a bridge story. We kind of fell into it by accident, out of necessity. So what happened was, like, we were in this sort of valley of death, as you call it. And then in March of 2013, we launched this playground, which wasn't even the final product that we could charge for, but it was an idea of a product that we launched on like Hacker News and Reddit, et cetera. And then it took off, and that got us enough traction to get into YC the second time that we applied. And then we thought, like, you get into YC, you're sort of like, the idea is everything else is easy from now on, right?
Right.
So we, and actually, like, going through that program was like really, really rigorous. But it was, it was sort of on rails. You now have a little bit of funding because they give you funding up front. It's something that can, really help me assuage my wife's fears, my own fears around, like, am I going to be able, even though we're paying ourselves minimum wage at that point, it's still like something is coming, right?
Yeah.
And then we went into demo day, and by the time demo day hit, like, all these other startups in our batch, and we had like DoorDash, a bunch of others, were like either already funded on that day.
The hot ones.
Yeah, exactly.
Have already gotten off the ground.
Yeah, or talking to like a ton of investors. And we thought like the same was in the cards for us. And we got some early investors where we, all these other companies were raising $1, $2, $3, $4 million sometimes. After demo day, in the first couple of weeks, we raised something like 250 or 300K. And then we had, 60, 70 meetings with investors. And this was like an even more anxiety inducing and stressful time in my life than even the fall. Because it was like constantly going into, I think, the expectation of like, hey, it's going to be easy to raise once you're a YC company, to getting either like silence or no's, or, we'll see when other people join or whatever. And I think we went like almost a month of like not building anything, being in conversations with investors, freaking out about like, are we going to have money to keep going? And then we met with Paul Graham, who's like one of the founders of Y Combinator. And he said, look, you have around 300K. There's 3 of you. You divide that by 3. You have a year, like you can't hire, but you have a year and you can just like focus on the product. You can't keep doing this if it's stressing you out so much. So the second we went back to all investors and said like, hey, we're done raising, then a bunch of investors said like, hey, wait a second. Like now that you say you don't need more money, here's a little more. So we ended up actually raising a seed round around the fall of 2013. And that seed round like turned us into we were operating the same way that I think any startup operates, right? Like we have a ton of money. It was like $1.4 million in the bank. Let's start to hire as quickly as possible. Let's start building product, et cetera. And then a year goes by and that money is just like, you can see the curve going like aggressively towards zero. And then you start having conversations again about raising more and they sort of fizzle out because we're not growing fast enough. We're still building the product. The product was very, not very, what we're hearing from both investors and from customers is that it's not powerful enough for, professionals, but it's too hard to use for individuals, right? There's no Squarespace, but like for people who are building like really, really powerful things, like Webflow just wasn't there yet. And then it was like, holy crap, we're gonna die. Like if we like our revenue is going up like this, but our expenses are going up like this. So that's when we just really buckled down, and out of necessity, we're like, well, we can't raise more. We can't justify, look, nobody's going to give us more money for like a Series A or something like that. So we just have to get to something where we're cash flow positive. And that was like the best thing to be forced into, to be honest, because it forces discipline around like, we had to pause hiring. We had to like really think about revenue. We had to think about what products are going to, and what improvements are going to lead to revenue. We started working on our CMS. That has since been like the majority of our business. And then, the next 6 years, we're just running on that revenue. Like our customers were our investors. And it wasn't until, we had probably crossed like $20 million in annual recurring revenue where we started talking to investors again. And that was all about how do you accelerate the mission and vision? And that's when we started seeing like venture capital as a tool, not like a necessity where like, okay, you need it to survive, but more like, how can you use it as a tool? Just like you would, taking out a mortgage on a house. Sure, you can save for 30 years and then like buy it with cash. But can you like have that value sooner? And that's how we started to see bring in on investors. So it's sort of like, I think if we had set out to bootstrap from the very beginning, we'd be in a totally different position. We wouldn't even be able to do that. We didn't have a product that actually led to revenue. And it was necessary to raise that seed round. Otherwise, we'd be totally out of business. And getting to profitability or cash flow positivity was sort of like kind of a happy accident because we were forced into it. But once we were there, it created the kind of discipline that we try to keep to this day, where we always want the company to be default alive, that we never need additional investment dollars to survive. We use that capital strategically, to move faster, but it's not one of these like make it or break it type of decisions.
Yeah, I think, and I think the thing that I'm hearing from you, which often gets lost with a lot of people that are raising capital or even thinking about raising capital, is this idea that I know every time that I've gotten in a tough spot, like the best advice I've always gotten is like, go sell, and get yourself out. And as I have sold, and it's interesting, like even that thing that you said, by the way, where,
just to clarify, you mean sell the product, not sell the company, right?
Right. Yeah. Don't sell the company. Yeah. Sell the product, get revenue in. And, but like, even you like creating that focus and then publicly mentioning that focus, then that got the investors like, had the only thing that motivates investors, which is fear of missing out. And that like pushed them to like, oh shoot, like something magical's happened over there. They're trying to make money. They're focused. It's like, I got to get in. And then that, and it's like, it's just amazing to me that whenever I have like stopped sort of worrying about, oh shoot, like how am I going to raise? How am I going to do this? And I just like focused on the customer, focused on getting money and into the business through those customers. Like, I don't know. I don't know that there's ever been a negative impact from doing that. It's always it's like, revenue solves all problems. Like like that's a cliche, but it's actually true. Like it really does solve most all problems.
Yeah. And paradoxically, investors flock to businesses that don't need them because like the foundations are there. And that's where venture capital can be used truly as an accelerator, not as like the make it or break it type of tool. And it gives just this feeling of like being in control of your own destiny as a founder, or as a company. Even like as a company, you feel that the collection of team members and employees and everybody working on the product is actually steering the ship to where we want to take the mission and vision of the company. And you have so much more optionality when it's revenue and your customers are driving the strength of the business, rather than like, okay, you just have a bunch of cash that investors happen to put in that is going to run out at some point, where you're going to need more. You're going to have to return that capital at some point, et cetera, et cetera. So customer revenue is like the best way of non-dilutively fund your business. And, I think that's a often overlooked, obvious part of running a business.
Yeah, it's the most important part of running a business, and it's often overlooked.
Yeah. And I would actually say it's not the most. So one thing, I have this book on my desk called The Infinite Game, because I reread it once every month or so. It actually I love the way it paints the true responsibility of a business, because it's not just like generate revenue. It's all about advancing a cause, like doing something, like bringing some sort of value into the world that makes the world a better place, and where that value that you bring to the world is actually much higher to the world than it is to you. For every $20 that we get for somebody like using Webflow, they're actually creating thousands of dollars worth of value. Like they're either reselling their work as a freelancer, or they're building a startup or whatever. The second responsibility is to protect people, protect people at your company, protect people in the community, have a responsibility for even the planet and the environment, et cetera. And lastly, it's generate revenue to fund the first two. It's not generate revenue to make investors richer, to make founders richer, or whatever. It's generate revenue to keep doing the first
create
two
value
as long as you can. And I love that framing, because it's not just about like, okay, more revenue for the sake of more revenue. It's more revenue to feed the ability to keep creating more value in the world and keep serving customers.
It's a great thought. That's a great insight. I wanted to ask you about, I know this summer when I saw last summer when I saw your Twitter feed, it said like, hey, I'm on sabbatical. I thought about, we met this morning, so it's great to meet you. But when I saw that, I thought a lot about it, because it just like, there are these things that we sort of feel like, when we're building a company, like I should do that. Like I want to make that part of my company. And then there are these reasons why we say like, I'm not doing that, and they're really positive things, but you're just like, I just don't have time, or like, I don't have the money to do that, or like whatever the excuses, or as Clayton Christensen would say, like the other good decision, or the other smart decisions that led to us not doing the thing that's actually better for us. But I just wondered, like in terms of, building a culture and building something that's sort of like, that's going to be around for a long time. Like, how do you make those trade-offs, especially early on, of like, hey, like this sabbatical, like there's 100 reasons why you should not do a sabbatical. And I don't, and maybe you could explain why you did, so we understand it better. But, like it was something that it was a sacrifice that you said like, hey, I'm going to do this because it's important to me for this. Like, how do you make those trade-offs? And is there a point where you can, should you do that from the beginning? Is there a point where you say, hey, I caught my breath. I'm not, working through the night every night, trying to like just survive. And now I can start doing it. Like when can you start? When do you sort of do that?
So I think the underneath it all is the realization that at any company, any startup, any business, like it's the business is like this abstract concept, but it's actually a collection of people working on solving problems together, right? And at Webflow, we ingrain that sort of feeling of the importance of people in our mission. Like we actually have dual missions where the first one, and they're not like 1 and 2, they're more like 1 and 1 or 1A and 1B, where the first one is to empower everyone to create software without writing code. Like that's the obvious one. Like you can, that's what our product does. We empower people to like capture the power of software without having to go get like a 4-year degree and computer science or whatever. But the second part of the mission is to create the kind of company where each individual person can live an impactful and fulfilling life. And that's a much harder one to meet, because it recognizes that people get fulfillment in different ways. They have a sense of impact in different ways, and we try to maximize that as much as we can. And that's kind of one of the catalysts that made us think about this sabbatical program, which is not just for me, it's for everyone in the company. Like once you spend 5 years at the company, you get 5 weeks off. You get money for, if you want to go travel and take a vacation or whatever, or take a class. And you get that every 5 years. And that, I think a really important realization there is like 5 years is a long time, right? Especially to devote, these days people change companies like every 1 to 2 years or whatever. And if you have put in 5 years working at a company, there should be a recognition of that, not just like a plaque that you get like, hey, thanks for your service, but like some time to reflect and do whatever is, important to you, and think about the next leg of the journey, maybe get re-inspired for the next 5 years. That's what it was for me. It's to, when I first started Webflow, it was 100% of the time, like coding, talking to customers, building this product, designing, doing talks, etc. Now it's like 90% hiring, kind of inspiring, running, like trying to create an organizational structure. Like the product is now the company and the set of people. And that's a fundamentally different type of work that is much, much harder. And for me, the sabbatical was all about like, how do I commit to the next 5 years? And how do I like take a step back and figure out what's important for me in the next leg of the journey? And it was like just pretty, I don't want to use the term groundbreaking, but like I went and did astrophotography for a while. I spent a bunch of time with my family and a bunch of time alone, just like taking pictures of the stars in the Milky Way. And it was just, re-inspired me around like why the work I'm doing is important, why, even though I have like this tingling sometimes, like go move to a beach and just go like fishing all the time and just like take it easy or whatever. But just re-inspired me around like why our mission is so important and why it's important to keep scaling what we're doing and keep bringing more value into the world. And I want that for everybody in the company. Like we've had now, I think over 20 people eligible for the sabbatical, just because people have stuck around for a long time. And, worst case that could happen, people spend a month and they figure out that, maybe working at Webflow is not for them anymore. That's never happened so far. It's only been a good thing where people come back sort of refreshed. And the bonus point was that it's kind of a stress test for like what happens when I'm gone and what breaks. In many ways, like
what happened?
Not much happened, not much broke, which is like, I thought like 100 things would break, maybe 5 did. And it just sort of reinforces your confidence and pride in the team that you've built, and gives you confidence that like, like the next stage is sure it's going to be hard, but that doesn't mean if I get sick or God forbid get hit by a bus or something that the company's not going to survive. So it was like a good reset. I think the you definitely need to be at a stage of company where you can afford to do that. Where, if we did that, even though everybody wants to take a break when you're just grinding,
Sure.
But it had to be at a specific maturity of the company where you're not just like leaving people high and dry, and you plan for it well ahead of time. And for us, it was like, I think we implemented that program about 6 or 7 years after funding, when we were already, after founding, when we were already profitable, when we had like a strong team of like redundancy sort of set up across different parts of the org, et cetera. So I highly recommend setting up that kind of program.
Yeah. As people that are close to me know, I have talked about this. You may have inspired me to do something like this. I haven't announced anything yet, but I'd like to do it.
Start with a week if you can't do a month.
So this is kind of comes from somebody in the audience, and this is what your advice would be for somebody that's bootstrapping their startup.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to penetrate a saturated and seemingly quite competitive market. So let's call it a big market. Most big markets have somebody there, and even your own space. I mean, we won't name them, but there are lots of tools that I can remember that seemed like they were doing great, and were just like raised tons of money right when Webflow started to kind of come on. So what is your advice to somebody that's in that kind of situation?
My personal advice would be to make sure that you have something that strongly differentiates you. For us, even though there were like tens, like the decades worth of startups or big companies at that point that were building websites, for us, we were the first, or not the first, but like the best company to execute on responsive design at the time. It was sort of like starting to be new, and Wix, Weebly, Squarespace, even WordPress didn't really have like great tools for that. Adobe was kind of trying to catch up. So we had like that one hook of like, all these tools do everything that we do. But what we actually do without code is the ability to do like these breakpoints or design for both a desktop and a tablet at the same time. And that's the only thing that got people to notice, is because like we were providing some kind of value that others weren't. I don't know how we would approach it if we felt that our product was not differentiated. So I think as long as you feel that there's something that absolutely makes you like a better alternative to those other alternatives in the crowded market, that's what you play up. So you have to lead with your strength.
Great. The last thing I just want to ask you about is just your community. We talk. Community is having its moment. More people talked about community last year than like the previous 10 years combined. I think people like you or people like us who kind of instinctively been doing it, it just seemed like the right thing to do. It's now become like community is now a strategy. You have these people that have this deep affinity to your product and what you're doing. And I wonder if I'm trying to just build that with that first, I mean, you said this well, like trying to get one customer to love what we're doing. And then you kind of try to get 5 or 10 customers to love what you're doing. Is there something repeatable there that if you were doing it again, that you would say, I would keep doing this, or I would do this to try to like build that early community into something more meaningful?
Yeah, absolutely. Like for us, and I see Finn is about to kick us off. For us, it was absolutely important to set up a community forum in the very beginning. That was like it was the place where everything happened. Customer support, every single person in the company was there to answer questions. And I think people didn't actually develop this affinity for the product. They didn't become like customer advocates until they saw how responsive we were in that forum. Like we were obsessive about going to every single question, making sure that the founders were there, like every single employee was there from day one. That's advice for myself, is like we should have kept investing into that ethos over time. Right now, we're sort of reevaluating how to get more of that energy into our forum, which is now scaled to hundreds of thousands of people, and it's much harder to answer every question, et cetera. But I think that's what created that early set of loyalists and advocates, because they knew that we were listening. We were like quickly responding to their problems, solving like building quick little features, solving bugs, etc. And that created other advocates that then became the people who were answering, questions and started creating like events, and that sort of organically started to sprout. But it was really, really important to have all of us in there. I think we were spending like 20% of our days like coding, 80% of the time, and building the product, and the other 20% just like with the community actively, so that they knew that we were there listening to them. So I think that any product, especially one where customers have a lot of input into what they want built, it's really important to create that kind of space. And it can't be a space where it's just like you're running events. It has to be like day to day, like essentially a forum, where all kinds of issues can be brought up, and you have like this direct communication with the product and the company.
Thank you so much for being here. Great way to kick off this week, and inspiring story. So good luck with your new puppy today, getting your new puppy today. And
thank you.
Yeah, hope to have you back sometime.